Leaving was the hardest decision I ever made, but staying would have meant losing myself. Walking out that door was the first step towards finding my freedom. When I packed my bags, I didn't just leave behind a place. I left behind years of hurt and betrayal. I walked out the door and into a future where I could finally breathe. In the moment I decided to leave, I realized that sometimes the most shocking changes in our lives are the ones we need the most. I walked away to start anew. I walked out the door with nothing but my courage and a suitcase. Little did I know that step would lead me to a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. The moment I closed the door behind me, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Walking away was terrifying, but it was also the most liberating thing I've ever done. Leaving was never part of the plan, but staying was suffocating my soul. I chose to pack my bags and embrace the unknown, finding strength I never knew I had. As I walked out the door, I left behind a life of lies and deceit. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. Packing my bags felt like the end of an era. Walking out the door, I was greeted by the dawn of a new beginning, one filled with possibilities and self-love. The decision to leave was both shocking and necessary. Walking out that door was the beginning of a path that led me to rediscover my worth and my happiness. I never imagined I would be the one to leave, but when I did, it was like breaking free from chains. Walking out that door was the start of reclaiming my life. When I packed my bags and walked out the door, I left behind a past that no longer served me. It was the first step towards building a future that was truly mine. Walking away was my way of taking back control. I left behind everything I knew, but I found strength in the unknown and courage in the journey ahead. The shock of leaving was nothing compared to the shock of staying. Walking out the door was my declaration of independence and the beginning of a new chapter. I walked out the door with tears in my eyes, but hope in my heart. Packing my bags was the first step towards healing and discovering my true self. Leaving felt like a betrayal to everything I once knew, but staying felt like a betrayal to myself. Walking out that door was the bravest thing I've ever done. When I finally walked out the door, I realized that sometimes the most shocking decisions lead to the most beautiful transformations. I chose to start anew. Packing my bags was an act of self-love. Walking out the door was my way of saying enough to the pain and yes to a future filled with potential and peace. The decision to leave came as a shock to everyone, including myself. Walking out the door was my way of choosing freedom over familiarity and hope over hurt. I never thought I would have the strength to leave, but packing my bags was the first step towards reclaiming my life. Walking out the door was a leap of faith. Leaving behind everything I knew was the hardest thing I've ever done. But walking out that door was the most powerful act of self-respect I've ever taken. Packing my bags was a moment of clarity. Walking out the door, I felt the chains of my past break, opening up a world of possibilities and self-discovery. The shock of my departure was felt by everyone, but the liberation I felt was indescribable. Walking out that door was my first step towards true happiness. When I walked out the door, I left behind a life that no longer served me. Packing my bags was the beginning of a journey towards healing and self-love. The decision to leave was shocking to everyone, but staying would have meant losing myself. Walking out that door was an act of bravery and self-preservation. Packing my bags felt like closing a chapter. Walking out the door was the beginning of a new story, one where I was the author of my own destiny. Leaving was a shocking decision, but it was also the most necessary one. Walking out the door, I embraced the uncertainty and found strength in my new path. When I walked out the door, I left behind the person I used to be. Packing my bags was the first step towards discovering who I truly am and what I deserve. The shock of my departure was felt deeply, but the liberation I experienced was profound. Walking out that door was the start of my journey towards freedom. Packing my bags was an act of courage. Walking out the door, I left behind a life of pain and stepped into a future filled with hope and self-empowerment. Leaving was a shocking decision, but it was also the most empowering one. Walking out that door was the first step towards reclaiming my life and my happiness. When I finally packed my bags, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. Walking out the door, I knew I was leaving behind the old me and embracing a new beginning. The shock of leaving was overshadowed by the relief I felt. Walking out that door, I realized I was stronger than I ever knew and capable of starting anew. Packing my bags was an act of self-respect. Walking out the door, I left behind a past that no longer served me and stepped into a future filled with promise. Leaving was a shocking choice, but it was also the most necessary one. Walking out the door, I embraced the uncertainty and found strength in my own resilience. When I walked out the door, I left behind a life of pain and uncertainty. Packing my bags was the first step towards a journey of healing and self-discovery. The decision to leave came as a shock, but it was also the most liberating choice I ever made. Walking out that door, I stepped into a future filled with hope. Packing my bags was a moment of clarity and courage. Walking out the door, I left behind a past that no longer served me and embraced the unknown with open arms.